Your cat just pushed your phone off the table. He looked you straight in the eyes, fully aware of what he was doing, and still chose to do it anyway. Most people assume this is attitude, maybe even a small act of revenge for being late with food, or just a sign of a bad mood. Some think the cat is doing it deliberately to annoy them, as if there is intent behind it that mirrors human emotions. But that interpretation is incorrect, and it misses something much deeper. What is actually happening inside your cat's mind in that moment is far stranger and far older than any human emotion. Behind that simple movement of a paw lies an instinct shaped over tens of millions of years. It is not about your phone, your mug, or even about you personally. It is about a mechanism that once determined survival in a very direct way. And your cat, even now, carries that mechanism in full working condition. There is a specific point in this story, a shift in understanding, after which you will no longer react to a foreign object the same way again. At first it seems like the object itself is the focus, as if the cat is interacting with it for no real reason. But in reality, the object is only a trigger, not the purpose. This behavior is not about destruction or mischief in the way humans interpret those ideas. It is part of a much larger system that operates automatically. Once you see that system clearly, your reaction changes almost instantly. The dropped mug, the falling phone, the sliding remote all become something else entirely. They are no longer accidents or provocations. They are results of a process that is precise and consistent. And once that realization happens, it becomes impossible to ignore it again. So to understand it properly, we need to start from the beginning. Imagine yourself not as a human, but as a small, efficient predator. You are fast, precise, and entirely dependent on your ability to hunt. Your food does not wait for you in a bowl. It hides, escapes, and sometimes fights back. Every movement you make has consequences, and every mistake carries risk. In that environment, there is one particular danger that outweighs many others. It is not hunger and it is not cold. It is injury, specifically a bite from something that is not fully subdued. A mouse can appear completely still, almost lifeless, and yet remain capable of sudden movement. It can wait for the exact moment when you relax and then strike. That single bite can lead to infection, inflammation, and eventually death. In that world, a false assumption about safety is often fatal. Because of this, cats develop a reflex that humans do not possess. Before taking prey into the mouth, the cat tests it with its paw. A light tap checks for movement, and if there is any response, the object is immediately classified as dangerous. If there is no reaction, the cat does not assume safety, it repeats the test again and again. This continues until the nervous system receives consistent confirmation that there is no threat. This reflex is not learned behavior, it is embedded deeply in the cat's biology. It exists at a level more fundamental than attachment, training, or routine. It is more persistent than the memory of where the food bowl is located. It operates automatically without conscious decision-making. When your cat engages with an object, this mechanism is already active, and it does not distinguish between prey and household items. Now look at your cat sitting at the edge of the table, staring at an object. From your perspective, it is just a mug or a phone, something ordinary and familiar. But your cat does not perceive it that way. It sees an object of unknown origin, stationary and untested. The absence of movement does not mean safety, it means uncertainty. The paw reaches forward, initiating the first contact. The initial push produces little or no reaction, which leads to a second, stronger push. The object begins to shift, moving closer to the edge, providing new data. A third push follows, and the object falls. At that moment, the cat's brain processes the sequence of responses. The object reacts to force, but does not counterattack, and this information is stored immediately. The test is complete and the result is clear. From the cat's perspective, the object has passed a basic evaluation. It is not alive and it does not pose a threat. The falling of the object is not the goal, it is simply a consequence of the testing process. The cat does not experience this as destruction or loss. Instead, it is a confirmation of expected behavior. That is why the cat often looks down at the fallen object calmly, without excitement or concern. The expression resembles that of a researcher observing a predictable outcome. There is no emotional reaction because none is required. The process has delivered the necessary information. Once the data is obtained, the task is finished, and the cat moves on, as if nothing significant has happened. In 2017, researchers in Japan conducted an experiment that became widely referenced in studies of feline behavior. They presented cats with two types of objects under controlled conditions. The first group of objects remained completely still and did not respond to touch. The second group was designed to produce slight movement or sound when contacted. The results were consistent and clear across multiple observations. Cats showed little to no interest in the unresponsive objects. However, they repeatedly returned to the objects that reacted to their touch. This was not because those objects were more interesting in a human sense. It was because they mimicked the behavior of potential prey. The reaction itself triggered attention, activating the cat's instinctive classification system. Now consider your phone in this context. When your cat touches it, the device lights up, produces sound, or vibrates slightly. These responses closely resemble the signals of something alive. From the perspective of the cat's nervous system, this is not a passive object. It behaves in a way that demands further investigation. As a result, your cat returns to it repeatedly, performing the same tests again and again. This behavior is not driven by irritation or intention to disturb you. It is driven by a deeply embedded functional pattern. The cat is not acting out, it is performing a task. Each interaction provides additional information. Each response reinforces the classification of the object as relevant. And this loop continues as long as the object remains responsive. However, this instinct alone does not explain the full behavior. It accounts for the initial contact, but not for the prolonged observation and repeated actions. There is another mechanism involved, one that is equally fundamental. Cats are solitary hunters, meaning they rely entirely on their own abilities. They do not have a group to compensate for mistakes or share risk. Every decision must be accurate and every movement must be calculated. Before acting, they spend time observing and analyzing. They evaluate distance, stability, and potential reaction patterns. This process is quiet and deliberate, often mistaken for inactivity. But in reality, it is a form of preparation. The moment before the paw moves is often the most important part of the sequence. There is also a third component that is rarely discussed but highly significant. A cat's paw pads are extremely sensitive, containing a dense network of nerve endings. These receptors detect pressure, temperature, vibration, and texture simultaneously. When a cat touches an object, it gathers a large amount of detailed information instantly. This includes the material of the surface, its temperature, and its resistance to force. It can also detect subtle internal vibrations that might indicate movement or life. This tactile interaction functions as a form of scanning. It is precise, efficient, and highly informative. The cat is not simply pushing objects, it is actively analyzing them. And the more varied the objects, the richer the sensory input becomes. Finally, there is one more factor that significantly amplifies this behavior. Domestic cats spend a large portion of their time sleeping, often between 12 and 16 hours each day. The remaining time is meant for activity that is rarely available in a typical indoor environment. Their nervous system is designed for constant stimulation, including hunting and exploration. In an apartment, this stimulation is limited or absent. As a result, everyday objects become substitutes for a natural environment. A table covered with items becomes a complex sensory field. Each object offers different feedback, creating variety where none naturally exists. And when the owner reacts, the environment becomes even more dynamic. The cat learns that interacting with objects also activates the most responsive element in the space. When your cat pushes something and you immediately respond, you are reinforcing the behavior. Your movement, your voice, and your reaction provide exactly the stimulation the cat is seeking. This is not punishment from the cat's perspective, it is a successful outcome. Over time, the cat forms a simple association. Touching certain objects leads to increased activity in the environment. And since you are the most responsive and engaging element, you become part of that loop. The behavior becomes more frequent, not less. This is why attempts to correct it through reaction often fail. The cat is not interpreting your response as negative. It is interpreting it as confirmation that the action was effective. And so the cycle continues. The most practical approach is to remove reinforcement and redirect the behavior. Avoid reacting when objects are pushed, even though this may feel counterintuitive. Provide alternative sources of stimulation that are appropriate and safe. This can include toys with unpredictable movement or varied textures. The goal is not to stop the instinct, but to guide it toward better targets. At the same time, remove valuable or dangerous items from accessible surfaces. Objects like phones, headphones, and especially hot drinks should not be left within reach. This reduces both risk and opportunity. The behavior itself will not disappear, but its impact can be managed. And over time, the pattern can shift towards safer interactions. The next time your cat sits at the edge of the table, watching an object with intense focus, you will recognize the process. It is not random and it is not personal. The cat is not trying to upset you or cause inconvenience. It is following a sequence that has been refined over millions of years. The object in front of it is being evaluated, tested, and understood. And the outcome is already predictable. The object will not pass the test. It never does.